Redshift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. There's this line in the season 1 finale of Dare Me where Beth's mom is talking about having seen Beth's cheer coach a while ago. Beth's mom says, quote, "I saw her once a week or two ago before I knew who she was. Pretty blonde standing outside a convenience store. Couldn't even light her own cigarette, her hands were shaking so bad. I played Sir Galahad." And then Beth says, "Good Samaritan." And then Beth's mom says, "I wanted to help her out. She reminded me of someone I once knew. Someone so beautiful and so hungry that she thought she could get everything she wanted. People like that are dangerous." And then Beth says, "Dangerous?" And then the mom says, "Because the beauty goes away, but the hunger only grows, and nobody gets everything they want. You got to decide what's worth keeping and what's worth trading." So that was the end of the quote. I thought this is quite insightful and true. People who think they deserve everything and are hungry, very ambitious, those people are dangerous. Like she said, nobody gets everything they want. And like she said, beauty goes away, but the hunger only grows. This is so true. This is why you get XXers who have hit the wall and are still single being very vicious. They become alcoholics or just real bitches because they're so bitter. It's true that ambitious people are dangerous because most ambitious people are fine with throwing other people under the bus in order to get what they want. They don't mind lying, backstabbing, stealing, etc. If you're ambitious but you will not sacrifice your morals in order to achieve your ambitions, then that's fine. You're a good person. Ambition is not inherently bad, but most ambitious people have no such restraints, especially these days, and they will bend the moral and legal rules, often even just outright break them, in order to get what they want. Regarding what Beth's mom said about knowing what to keep and what to trade, I want to say that too is interesting. I think you can look at it as like, if you're an XXer, then what's worth trading is your freedom, your free will. Trading your freedom and your free will and your ability to get sexual variety, etc., that's worth trading in order to get provision, procreation, love, and wise guidance from a husband. But what is worth keeping is her soul. And the way an XXer keeps her soul is by not being promiscuous and by not working, by not selling her soul for sexual variety or selling her soul to hypergamy, to monkey branching, and also not selling her soul to make money by working on her career. And since wages are driven down by a greater percentage of people being in the workforce, namely XXers, this means that to succeed you have to compete a lot harder, and this incentivizes immorality. When it's just men in the workforce, men can succeed without compromising their morals, but when competition is incredibly intense, too intense, then the only way to succeed is to sell your soul, to compromise your morals, to forget about morality, to lie, to essentially steal, to backstab, etc. And since in a society of hardly any XXers working, men make much more money and thus do not have to compromise their morals to make a decent standard of living, this means that all of society is far more moral and functional. This means more trustworthiness, more happiness, more working together between people in society, less poverty because of less stealing, whether legal stealing or illegal stealing. But having XXers be ambitious in terms of career, financially ambitious, this drives down wages and this hurts XXers too because then there's fewer marriageable men and society is more screwed up as well, which hurts everyone. Society is more screwed up because of it having become the case that society is way less moral because of everyone having to sell their soul in order to just financially survive, because of how much more intense the career competition is, because of everyone making less money, because of XXers being in the workforce. You see? If you're an XXer, if you're an XXer, what is worth keeping is your soul, your morals, your innocence, and what is worth trading is your ambition, your career ambition, your youth, your beauty, your free will, and your freedom. The hunger for career success only grows more ravenous when you get XXers into the workforce and cause them to miss their chance to have kids, because then they're really invested in their career, and they'll do whatever it takes to try to fill that void that can never be filled. That void created by not getting to have kids because of having waited too long and lost her beauty and her fertility. But if an XXer marries and has kids, then she often stops caring about career because her kids have become her life. Not just because they're all-consuming in terms of time and all that, and attention, but mainly just because she loves her kids so much that career is like, she doesn't give a shit about that anymore. That's like, she sees how unimportant that is now compared to how much her kids matter because she loves her kids so much. And then she's happy to be a stay-at-home mom. To keep your soul, you have to be not too ambitious and not hedonistic either. And there's nothing wrong with pleasure and enjoying yourself some, but like hedonism is excessive pleasure seeking, or throwing morals away just in order to get pleasure, which is also another way of looking at the excessiveness of pleasure. See, you can be excessively hedonistic without being immoral, without hurting other people. For example, by overeating. And if you have the time and the money to do that, just sit around at home eating all the time and get huge, well, you're not really hurting anybody, but you're being hedonistic, and that's still a bad thing. Or you can be hedonistic in ways that do hurt other people. But the hedonism is bad either way. It's just inherently bad, but it's also doubly bad often because you hurt other people by being hedonistic a lot of times, right? So to keep your soul, you have to be not too ambitious, especially if you're a woman, and not hedonistic either, which is also a fault of women. Women are too ambitious these days because of, that movement of theirs starts with Neff, and also they are just naturally hedonistic. So they need to, but men can be ambitious, but they should not be too ambitious. Again, morality should restrain their ambition, and men are not naturally hedonistic, although men are too hedonistic these days too, because of the technology corrupting men and making men too hedonistic. And regarding losing your soul through promiscuity and ambition in career, these are actually related in XXers, because a lot of them use their sex appeal to advance themselves in their career. Many XXers even sleep their way up the ladder, getting promotions by having sex with the men who are higher in authority and power than her, and this benefits her career. And how's a guy supposed to compete with that, right? The only way he can compete with that is by being, even more ruthless and lying and scheming and backstabbing and breaking the law. And you see what I mean? It's not good to let, XXers be promiscuous, especially if they're using that promiscuity to advance their career. Neither is it good for them to be ambitious in their career because they'll naturally be amoral to achieve that. But if they use the promiscuity, sleeping their way to the top like that in addition, then that's even worse, What an XXer should keep is her soul, and what she should trade is her freedom. She should give her freedom to her husband, and she should give up on her free will when getting married, and she should obey her husband from then on, like the Bible says, and like marriage vows in America used to say before the feminists and liberals changed them. Marriage vows used to have the XXers vow to love, honor, and obey her husband. And I think the man's was something like love, honor, and cherish his wife. Because he didn't vow to obey her, but she did. Women in America used to vow to obey their husbands. The Bible, the Old Testament, tells men to love their wives and tells XXers to obey their husbands. A disobedient wife is a bad wife, and a non-innocent wife, a wife who is not a virgin, who lost her virginity to some other guy, a wife who can't give her innocence to her husband on her wedding night because she's not a virgin, such an XXer is also a bad wife, is also pretty much worthless. She's not going to treat him with the reverence and love that he deserves because she doesn't love him that much, and she doesn't revere him that much because that love and reverence she has could only be felt toward the guy who took her virginity because she only is attached to him. XXers give up their freedom, their career ambitions, and their innocence, that is their virginity, and in exchange they get a roof over their head, food to eat, clothes to wear, medicine when they're sick, they get love from their husband, they get his wise guidance, which is better than her own, because men are rational and think long-term, and are moral, and XXers are irrational and do not think long-term and are amoral. And XXers who do not have a man to guide her often suffer greatly because of it. Or at the very least, she wreaks havoc on everyone around her, trying to get what she wants, and so due to her immorality and lack of long-term vision, she causes a lot of damage in society. XXers get a lot for what they give up when marrying a man. If they keep what they should and trade what they should, then they can be happy. And if they don't, if they don't keep what they should, and if they don't trade what they should, but instead squander it by riding the carousel for years and years, then XXers end up miserable. And another side effect of XXers working is that it not only means less time they get to spend with their kids, that is, less time to spend doing what makes them truly happy, that is, taking care of their kids, and not only does it mean that she's literally working for free, and not only does it mean that she and her husband are having to be ruthless at work in order to make money and survive and progress because of the competition of work being so much more intense because of XXers being in the workforce, it also means that her husband and her become more evil people because of the evil that they have to do at work in order to survive in the work world and progress in the work world. This makes both of them worse spouses for each other because of them both being more evil, and thus by XXers working, they are harming their souls and the souls of men in society, and this means everyone is far less virtuous, and thus everyone is far less fit to be a spouse, and thus fewer marriages last, and many of the ones that do last are still unhappy, and this has a negative effect on the kids, screwing up the entire next generation of kids who will then themselves be bad parents because of being screwed up by their parents, and then they'll have kids that are screwed up because of their bad marriages, because of them being screwed up by their parents. You see, and then those next kids will grow up to be an entire generation that is screwed up also, and then just every generation after that will be screwed up. You see, because they're all raised by a bad generation. And if XXers trade her freedom to her man when she marries, then she only has as much freedom as her husband allows her to have. But he'll let her have as much freedom as she can morally manage. That is, as much freedom as she can have before it starts to corrupt her. So she will not be utterly enslaved or anything like that. She'll just be restricted from doing things which make her a worse person. Things which make her marriage worse and her friendships worse. Things which make her a worse parent to her kids, etc. Things which don't make her a worse person, her husband will totally let her do those things. So she will only lose as much freedom as it is good for her to lose, which will of course vary from XXer to XXer depending on how Nawaltish her genes are, and also depending on how well she was raised, how loving and strictly moral the upbringing she got was. So really, while it might not be easy, it is definitely true that the things that XXers should keep are good things, and the things that XXers should trade are things that it is good for them to trade. It benefits for them. It benefits those XXers to trade those things to their husband. It is good for XXers to give their freedom to their husband. It makes those XXers better people, and it makes for better marriages, and it makes for, therefore, a functional society and a more virtuous next generation of kids, which turn into the next generation's adults, and therefore make for a functional society. And that was mainly what I want to say, although I also want to mention a little thing about the show itself, Dare Me. The show gets bad ratings. It gets like 0.3 or 0.34 million viewers every week, which is pretty fucking bad. I remember The Secret Circle, which I liked and got canceled after one season. That show, I think, got 0.8 million or something. So I'm thinking this show probably, although it seems to vary from like network to network, how bad ratings have to be before a show will get canceled. And it probably also depends on how expensive the show is to do. If it needs a lot of CGI, like The Secret Circle did, because of it being a fantasy show, then maybe the show's a lot more expensive, and then maybe that means, it'll be canceled much more easy. Whereas this show is not a fantasy show, so it has no CGI, so perhaps it's cheaper to make, so perhaps it's, able to survive with lower ratings. So I'm thinking the show will probably get canceled, but I'm not sure. But it is a pretty decent show. It started slow. I won't say I liked the first episode or two or three, but I was patient. I was waiting for it to get better because shows typically start out slow, right? But then episodes maybe 5 and 6, maybe 4, 5, and 6, I was like, this show, I don't know if I like this show. It's not that good. And I was like, it's not funny, and it's not really dramatic either. I'm like, what is this? You know what I mean? But for some reason, I kept watching it, and then in retrospect, I realized that I think the reason I kept watching it was because of the quality of the dialogue. So, I think that's why I kept watching it. And then around maybe episode 7 or so, it actually started getting significantly better as the season-long arc started to develop. And so that gave it some drama. It wasn't any just dark and nihilistic anymore. It was more dramatic, and while it still wasn't really funny, it was at least starting to get somewhat interesting, right? None of the main characters are likable. Colette French, played by Willa Fitzgerald, she's interesting, but she's not likable, per se. And Beth and Addie are the two main characters other than Colette French, their coach. And Beth is a bitch, and Addie's nicer, but she's a bitch too. It's just, and Colette French isn't nice or funny or anything. She's just a more cool, sophisticated kind of dark nihilism. And Beth and Addie are both dark and nihilistic. It's like, what is it to like about the show? I totally see why it gets bad ratings, right? But I did want to mention, other than the high-quality dialogue in the season-long arc, which did get interesting, not as good as a Julie Plec arc or anything, but it did get interesting. But one of the things that I like about the show is the names of the episodes. It shows, like, every show by anybody always has a theme that they follow with the titles of the episodes. Like, maybe it'll call the episodes like Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, or maybe it'll name all the episodes after a famous painting, like I think they did on that show, Switched at Birth, or they'll name every episode after like a famous quote, or, whatever. There's always some theme to the titles of episodes of a whole show. It follows the whole, the theme is followed through the, existence of the entire show. And the theme of this show for the titles of the episodes is war. Like one episode is called Fog of War, another is called Mutually Assured Destruction, another is called Code Red, another episode is called Parallel Trenches. You get the idea. I love that war theme with the titles of the episodes, especially since it's a show about women, because it's like, with women, everything's about competition and viciousness, and at the same time, it's like the show is quite dark and nihilistic, and like, they're one of the characters commits a major crime, and then she's trying to like not get caught by the cops. It's pretty interesting. I really like that about the show. But there are other things I like about the show too. But that was all I had to say about the show and about that topic that I wanted to talk about because of that interesting quote in that final episode of the first season. The final episode aired just a few days ago. This has been Redshift. I hope you got something out of this. Peace trucks for promiscuous men, because they're literally one of the biggest problems in all of society. Fiat currency, the promiscuity of men, the cowardice of the rest of men in letting them be promiscuous, and letting the government get away with all of its crimes, the surveillance and the propaganda and the censorship. Those are the biggest problems in society. The cowardice of the 99% of men, the promiscuity of men, whether they're at the top or not, fiat currency, surveillance, and censorship and propaganda, which are kind of two sides of the same coin. Those are the biggest problems in society. And, peace trucks for anybody who's tolerating that shit and not fighting it.